My very first week, my boss said, come up with a standard operating procedure for taking down an Al-Qaeda safe house. Of course, we had something called high value targets, HVTs, and that was the obvious list. It was Bin Laden, Zawahiri, Abu Zubaydah, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin Shib, the usual cast of characters. And those people who were that cooperating would remain in ISI custody. We believed at the time that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was not. In fact, he had never joined Al-Qaeda. He worked along with Al-Qaeda. We had very, very specific orders that we had to take him alive because he was this terrorist Superman and that he could lead us to Bin Laden. George Tenet called, the director of the CIA, and he told me, these were his exact words, he said, 24/7 CIA eyes on. So I tore up a sheet and I tied him to the bed from his wrists and his ankles. And then I put the ceiling fan on high to make it uncomfortably cold so that I wouldn't fall asleep. And I sat there like this in a chair at the foot of his bed and I just stared at him. The entire interrogation program at the CIA, they called it enhanced interrogation techniques. I called it a torture program. The entire program was a criminal act. I was ready to die for my country out there, and it was all based on a lie. Remember that 9/11 was the greatest intelligence failure in the CIA's history. 3,000 Americans were killed because we didn't do our jobs. I ran into a colleague of mine in the hallway. So I said, hey, where have you been? And he whispered, I've been in Afghanistan. I said, what are you doing in Afghanistan? And he said, I'm killing people. What do you think I'm doing? I'll tell you one thing about ISI too, is they weren't afraid of anybody. And ISI major in Lahore said, you can't run a counterterrorism operation from a 4-star hotel. The targeting came in different ways. So, of course, we had something called high-value targets, HVTs, and that was the obvious list. It was Bin Laden, Zawahiri, Abu Zubaydah, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Ramzi bin Shib, the usual cast of characters. There was what's called all-source analysis, trying to locate these people from CIA, DIA, NSA, ISI, MI6. Everybody's looking for these people. That was, let's call that 5% of the targets. The other 95%, we didn't have any idea what the names were. I'll give you an example. My very first week, my boss said, come up with a standard operating procedure for taking down an Al-Qaeda safe house. I had never done that before. So I went back to my office with a pad of paper and I said, if I were going to take down a terrorist safe house, how would I do that? Number one, I would want it to be dark. So I wrote 0200 at the top of the paper, 2 o'clock in the morning. The team has to be ISI, FBI, CIA. So I wrote all that down. We need battering rams to break down the door. We need guns, ammunition, night vision goggles, money, handcuffs. I came up with a very long list, which I ordered and was delivered to the embassy soon after. And then a couple of days later, I got a call from ISI and they said, we have a lead. What do you want to do with it? And I said, I just came up with this operational plan. Let's get together. And then at 2 o'clock in the morning, we break down the door. Okay. So we put our team together. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, we took the battering ram and we broke down the door of the house. There were 2 Al-Qaeda fighters, low-level young fighters in this house. One from Tunisia, one from, I think he was from Algeria. 18 years old and 19 years old. They immediately started crying, both of them. And one begged us to let him call his mother. So we put handcuffs. I gave them to ISI and they took them to Rawalpindi jail. And I said, hey, we were giving each other high fives. Hey, that worked. That was great. It was easy. Then a week later, I got a call from a friendly Arab intelligence officer and he said that he had a lead. He gave me the address and I called ISI and they said, okay, let's just do the same thing again tonight. So we did. We broke down the door. This time we caught 2 members of Egyptian Islamic Jihad. Very dangerous people. That worked too. And so we started doing these from once a week, then twice a week, then 3 or 4 times a week, and sometimes 2 in the same night. We would have split teams until the Abu Zubaydah capture, in which we did 13 raids simultaneously. We believed at the time that Abu Zubaydah was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was not. He was a bad man, but he was never the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. In fact, he had never joined Al-Qaeda. He worked along with Al-Qaeda. He created the House of Martyrs safe house in Peshawar, and he created the 2 Al-Qaeda training camps in Kandahar and Helmand. If you wanted to get into Afghanistan to fight, he would get you in. If you wanted to get out of Afghanistan and go home, he would get you out. So he was a facilitator, but he was not an Al-Qaeda leader. The second problem that we had with the intelligence on Abu Zubaydah was we did not know at the time that he had a cousin also named Abu Zubaydah. And so we're collecting intelligence from all around the world, and we're saying, Abu Zubaydah is planning an attack in Afghanistan. Abu Zubaydah is planning an attack in Jordan. Abu Zubaydah was in the United States 2 years ago. Abu Zubaydah is this, Abu Zubaydah is that. There are 2 Abu Zubaydahs. And I remember one of my colleagues saying, this guy must be some kind of terrorist Superman. If he's all over the world doing these operations, we can't find him. Well, it's because there were 2 of them. We had very, very specific orders that we had to take him alive because he was this terrorist Superman and that he could lead us to bin Laden. And we caught him in Faisalabad. And it turned out that none of the rest of it was true. None of it. And so I've become very much an activist over the last 20 years to release Abu Zubaydah and to apologize to him. I actually met with his attorney just a week ago, and the attorney had very good news that the American government is in talks with his attorneys to release him from Guantanamo if we could find a country that's willing to take him. After I left the CIA Inspector General released a report that was written in 2005 that had been declassified. And that's when the information came out. And I said, my God, we risked our lives for a lie? The whole thing was a lie. I was ready to die for my country out there. And it was all based on a lie. And so I connected with a former guard from Guantanamo, who actually guarded Abu Zubaydah. And we wrote a book together called The Convenient Terrorist, Abu Zubaydah and the Weird Wonderland of America's Secret Wars. The night that we caught him, after I specifically said, do not shoot him, a member of the Faisalabad police shot him 3 times. With an AK-47, no less, in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach. We ended up having to airlift him to Lahore, to a military base. And I was the only one there at the hospital with him. And George Tenet called, the director of the CIA. And he told me, these were his exact words, he said, 24/7 CIA eyes on, which means 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, do not stop looking at him. Well, I was already awake for 24 hours at that point, and I was exhausted, and I was afraid I would fall asleep. So I tore up a sheet, and I tied him to the bed from his wrists and his ankles. And then I put the ceiling fan on high to make it uncomfortably cold so that I wouldn't fall asleep. And I sat there like this, in a chair at the foot of his bed, and I just stared at him. He was bleeding to death. As fast as they could pump the blood into him, it was leaking out, and it was on the floor in a pool. It was all over him. It was all over the nurses and doctors. He was bleeding to death. It looked like a scene from a horror movie. And so after 24 hours, he finally came out of his coma, tied to the bed like this. And he was looking at me, and I was looking at him, and he went like this for me to come close. So I went up to him, and I moved his oxygen mask off to the side, and I said to him, "Shu ismak, what is your name?" And he shook his head like this. So I said it again, "Shu ismak." And he said in English, "I will not speak to you in God's language, And I said, "That's okay, Abu Zubaydah, we know who you are." And he started crying and he said, "Please, brother, kill me. Take the pillow and kill me." And I said, "Oh, nobody's going to kill you. We've been looking for you for a long time." He said, "What's going to happen to me?" And I said, "Honestly, I don't know. But I'm going to give you some advice. I am the nicest guy that you're going to meet in this experience. My colleagues, they're not nice like I am. So if there's just one thing that you do, it's that you have to cooperate." And he said, "You seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy and I'll never cooperate." I said, "Suit yourself." I sat with him for 56 hours and we talked a lot. He cried a lot. He said he would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. And I said, "Wait a minute, you're not the victim here. There were 50,000 people in those towers. What did you think we were going to do? Did you think that we wouldn't try to find you and kill you or kill bin Laden? You're not the victim. That's why I'm saying you have to cooperate." We talked about his family. He was very close to his mother. We talked about poetry. He wrote very extensive poetry. He would even write plays, little one-act plays. We talked about the differences between Christianity and Islam and the similarities between Christianity and Islam. And finally, I said to him, "You know, I should hate you. I should want to kill you. And I don't. You're just a man. And that's why you should cooperate." Finally, a CIA jet flew in and he was very nervous because he didn't know where he was going and we didn't know where he was going. So 3 FBI agents and I carried him out to the plane. He asked me to hold his hand. So I was holding the gurney with one hand and holding his hand with my other hand. We maneuvered him onto the plane. We laid him across the luggage rack at the back and we tied him down. And he squeezed my hand and I said, "Good luck. And remember, you have to cooperate." And then I never saw him again. The entire interrogation program at the CIA, they called it enhanced interrogation techniques. I called it a torture program. The entire program was a criminal act. This was a war crime or a crime against humanity. It's a dark stain on the modern history of the United States. And not only was it morally, ethically, and legally wrong, it was a failure in that literally no actionable intelligence was collected using these torture techniques. The only actionable intelligence that was ever collected was collected by the FBI by sitting across the table from Abu Zubaydah and giving him a cigarette and a cup of tea and some dates and a pen and paper to write a letter to his mother. That's the only way he gave actionable intelligence. But to beat him and waterboard him and drown him and try to shoot him in the head and slam his head against the wall and put him in a coffin, none of that worked. And it was a criminal act that demeaned us as Americans. I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed that it happened to him or to any other person who has ever been in American custody. It's a crime. We had a walk-in, and the walk-in had very specific information. So I said to my boss, we have to talk to ISI right away. So one of the ISI officers came to the American embassy. We had set up a follow-up meeting with the walk-in. And the walk-in made an accusation against a foreign embassy and said that this foreign embassy was plotting terrorist attacks. But his information was very specific. So he would tell us things like, there's a house in Multan at this address, and in the bedroom, there's a safe. And in the safe, they have weapons. ISI went to Multan. They go to the house. They go in the house, in the bedroom, and there's the safe. And so they are able to open the safe, and there's nothing in it but papers. Money and time wasted. Then the walk-in says, in Peshawar, this same embassy has a cache of weapons buried next to a mosque. And here's the location of the mosque. We all run to Peshawar, all of us, in 3 vans. And ISI goes in to the area, and they're digging and digging and digging all night long. They're digging and digging. There's nothing there. Nothing. This guy did this 3 times. ISI was getting angry. He's wasting their time, their money, their resources. But in the course of one of the interviews that we were doing with him, he said that he was a member of a terrorist group and that he fired a shoulder-fired rocket at the American embassy in like 1996 or something. The guys at ISI were so angry at this that he says, look, Colonel Tark said, this guy's a liar. Everything he told us is a lie. And you keep giving him more money and he keeps telling us more lies and we keep wasting more time. And I said, yeah, we should cut him off. And Colonel Tarek says, no, we're not going to cut him off. What we're going to do is we're going to arrest him. I said, arrest him for what? He committed terrorism against your embassy. He confessed to firing a rocket at your embassy. I said, yeah, but I don't believe him because the way he described it, it couldn't have happened. We know the angle of the rocket. We know where the rocket was fired from. And the information that he told us wasn't true. I thought he was just trying to impress us. He said, well, then that's his problem. And so ISI arrested him. And I remember the last time I saw the guy, he was crying as he was being led away in handcuffs. And he said, I just did it for the money. I don't know any of those terrorists. And I said, boy, you messed with the wrong people, my friend. I was always the good cop. My style was to talk to them like I'm talking to you, to show respect. And you know, when you first capture somebody, they're just militant. They're not going to talk. They're not going to cooperate. And 9 times out of 10, no, not 9, 7.5 times out of 10, they tell you, you know, go kill yourself. But I say in my first book, we captured a Jordanian in Islamabad. And we took him to ISI, and he was handcuffed and chained to the table. And I asked him his name. He told me his name. And I said, where did you come from? Not originally, but directly. He said, I came from Tora Bora, Afghanistan. And I said, okay. How did you physically get here from Tora Bora? He said, do you have a map? I said, actually, yes. I laid the map out and he showed me exactly the route that he gave. And this went on for 2 hours. And finally, at the end of it, I said to him, I have to ask you, you've been so cooperative and friendly even. Why have you answered my questions? And he said, I'm your prisoner. He said, what good would it do me to not answer your questions? And I said, you know what? That is an honest answer. I said, thank you for that. And he said, then let me ask you a question. I said, okay. He said, are you Christian? And I said, I am. And he said, I would like to invite you into the embrace of Islam, and I will be your sponsor. I said, thank you very much. That actually means a lot to me. I'm happy with my faith, but I appreciate the gesture. And I shook his hand. And then ISI took him away. And I understand that a year or 2 later, he was released. And he went back to Jordan to be with his family. And those people who were that cooperative would remain in ISI custody. ISI would interrogate them. They would send us written reports of what they said. And then eventually they would say, hey, this guy told us everything that he's going to be able to tell us. What do you want to do? And we'd say, just let him go. Just let him go. And the only thing the Pakistanis were really concerned about is they didn't want any of these Arabs to remain in Pakistan. They had to go back to their country, or if they didn't have a country, they had to go to some other country because they weren't staying there. We had some people that were true believers. We put a group of prisoners on a C-12 transport plane to Guantanamo, and what you do is you have to put a diaper on them and then a jumpsuit and a blindfold. Well, one of the co-pilots decided 2 or 3 hours into the flight to go into the back of the plane to make sure everybody was okay. And one of the Saudis had broken his handcuffs and he was chewing on the hydraulic cable of the plane to try to crash the plane and kill everybody in it. Got a call from an American journalist who said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. President Bush said that if there was torture, it was the result of a rogue CIA officer, and then nobody said anything. I kept waiting for it to go public. Number one, the CIA was torturing its prisoners. Number two, that torture was official US government policy. It was not the result of a rogue. And number three, that the policy had been approved by the president himself. The day after I blew the whistle on the torture program, a former deputy director of the CIA sent me an email. And he said, "You've chosen a difficult road, but I'm glad somebody did it." I believed that torture was a criminal act, and so revealing it was an act of patriotism, not an act of criminality. As far as the CIA goes, I'm on record as saying I don't believe there should be a CIA. I think it's a force for evil.